Hi, I'm Tracy.
And I'm Sharon, and we are Feet of Clay.
Confessions of the Cult Sisters.
We're back. What?
Sharon, I think we are actually taking a break from our break. I don't even know what to call this episode now.
Oh my God. Yes, it's getting hard to know if we're coming or going, Tracy. And all right, we got to not confuse our listeners too much because in the last episode, we said that we were going to take a break to work on something very emotionally intense and that we might not be back until later in August. So, well, and heads up, everyone, this is not that intense issue that we're working on. That one is still yet to come. Nope. This episode was a last minute thing for sure, because Tracy, you fucking texted me 48 hours ago, woman, that's all, saying, hey, can we talk about the crash again? And so we are pulling this together pretty damn fast. That said, it is stuff. It is a topic that we have thought long and hard about, and we've talked a lot about, and actually even more so over this past year. So we've been making notes all along the way, and that means we can pull this together quickly, right?
Yeah. And again, the main burden falls on you to do the editing part, because I think you and I both can pull talking together pretty well.
Oh, we can talk, woman. We can talk.
We can talk. But, I was just thinking that it would be a really great idea and important if we could touch base. I was thinking originally more informally for you and I to talk to each other and to touch base with our listeners, because we're approaching a very important date to us, Sharon. It's the anniversary of the plane crash that killed Keith Green, which, of course, happened on July 28th, 1982.
And we're going to release this episode on that date. This is just a couple days before.
On that date. And also because it's the 1-year anniversary of our episode number 14. Hard to believe it's been a year already, where we went on record for the first time to give our vantage point of what it was like to be there during the plane crash and its aftermath. Which was definitely a much harder version for many who had previously only been familiar with the story through Melody Green's book, No Compromise.
Yeah, which was a little bit more of a sanitized story, really. So, yeah, our version's definitely harder to listen to. And I also think it upset a good number of people. But at the same time, I don't know exactly how to call it. Maybe it was like relieving or affirming or validating. I think it helped others finally really make some sense of things that never really added up, and the mythology about Keith and everything, and kind of learning a little bit more his part in it, in that tragedy. But we are not going to repeat all of that today. So folks, if you haven't already heard that particular episode, we recommend going back and listening to it first. Again, that is episode 14.
And what better time, folks, to catch up on all of our episodes than during our break? And of course, the crash one was a very long episode. So if you really haven't listened to it, or if you just want to refresh yourself, take some time, break it up into small chunks, and go back and listen to that, because we are not, Sharon, going to repeat everything from that episode.
No, we're not. All right. But Tracy, you said as far as this talk being, quote, what did you say? Informal? Is that what you said?
Yeah, informal. I'd call you up and we'd chit chat.
Oh, come on. You know me better than that. As soon as you said, let's do this, I've been pulling transcripts, reviewing videos, going through all my own detailed notes and various correspondences. And, I'm going to do a really big tease right here and right now, Tracy.
Ooh, a big tease?
Yeah.
I'm afraid. But before you do the tease, I just have to say, that's why we have to be on a break, because I was going to try to make this easy on you, Sharon.
Ain't nothing easy. Ain't nothing easy, girl. All right. So, folks, like we said, this isn't just a rehash of stuff that we've already discussed about the crash. The truth is that I am ready to go on record now about something that has never before been talked about publicly, not even by us last year. I mean, actually, back when we were recording that episode, Tracy, you remember we did discuss some of this stuff we're going to handle today.
Mhm.
But I wound up cutting that part out when I was doing the editing because I felt we just needed a little more time to do a little deeper investigation, ask
Mhm.
questions, get verification. And we have done that. And we now have that validation and verification. So I also know some people are going to accuse us, mostly me, of sensationalism, but it does feel really, really important to me to set the record straight, especially as it involves the reputation of the pilot and our friend, Don Burmeister.
Okay. And when I wanted to just do an informal talk, I didn't know that we were going to go where I think you're going to go. And I thought you were going to save that till the end. So,
Yes, we're going to do it at the end here, but I did want people to know up front that, so.
okay. Well, folks, stay tuned for what that is. I think Sharon is, going to go on record. And you can't just blame her because I'm right there with her on this. And we'll get into it. And she's got some data points to back up some assertions that she's going to make.
Yeah. Some would say outrageous assertions, but we'll get there. So before we launch into that new stuff, let's just do a quick recap on a few of the things from last year's crash episode, again, number 14. So in it, we discussed a lot of details about Keith's role in the crash. So what played a part, like his financial indulgence, his ego, he wanted to have these planes, his obvious gross negligence in not complying with the rules and the guidelines and the requirements, and his overall spiritual arrogance, and I think worst of all, his abusive manipulation and coercion of others. We also talked about how after the crash, the four of us who were on what was called, quote, leadership, which was me and my then husband, Martin, and Wayne and Kathleen Dillard, we all had immediate anger at Keith, not at Don, because we all knew in our hearts and we said it to one another that Keith had caused this. And in the episode, we also talked about Keith's desire to get his own pilot license and how all of us, we had completely opposed that. In fact, we told him to his face that none of us would ever fly in a plane with him as pilot because he was a reckless, dangerous, foolish risk taker just when driving cars or the tour bus. And none of us felt really comfortable with him behind the wheel. And there was no way in hell we would ever get on a plane with him as pilot.
You know, as you recap that, I'm like, what else could you say that is more damning than that, right? That caused people the first time around to have an issue with that episode. But, since last year, it seems like more and more stories are coming out, or there'll be references to the Keith Green plane crash than I'd ever noticed before.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and I'm going to tell it on myself, I had a mustard yellow car in high school.
Oh my God.
And so it's like when you get this outrageous colored car and you're like, I've never seen these on the road before. And then as soon as you get one, you see that car and color everywhere.
Oh, right. It is crazy how that happens.
And so it's almost like, since we went live with our episode on the plane crash, that just more and more stories are coming out. More and more references are coming out there. I mean, it's been 42 years, Sharon.
Yeah.
But there are things we're coming across mainly on YouTube.
Mhm.
And since we recorded last year, Sharon, there are 2 new videos. Well,
Mhm.
one actually new to us. It was recorded, I think, right a couple months before we recorded our episode last year.
Mhm.
And then one that's literally brand new. And
Yeah.
and we, that was the main reason I wanted to get with you and kind of informally go over what those videos say and have some conversation about it.
Yeah, how's that working out for you, Tracy?
And of course, we're going to post those links in our show notes.
Yeah. And the newest one, that was released June 23rd, 2024, so that's just last month.
Wow.
And I don't remember, did we first learn about this, like, somebody saw it posted on my ex-husband's Facebook page? Is that
Yes, it was. Someone had actually sent it to me that it was a video that was posted on your ex's Facebook page, and I can still go in and see it.
Yeah, I'm blocked. I'm blocked, so I can't.
And I think at least one person from our old circles actually thought that your ex produced the video and then
Ah,
posted it.
well, I mean, he has wanted to be a movie producer for what is it, like, I don't know, 30 plus years now, but he hasn't quite gotten there yet.
Yeah, and then when you actually see the video, it was surprising that that person thought that to me.
Mm.
So he did post it for people to click into it, and then he had, I think, made the first comment on the YouTube video.
Hmm.
And so I'll read his comment that he made. Quote, I was the VP of the ministry and worked closely with Keith nearly every day for 4 years. Keith was an amazing and godly man in so many ways, a child prodigy and an actual genius. But he was also impulsive and childish at times. Taking risk was part of his personality that paid off well vocationally, but his crossing the line of caution eventually caught up with him. That was part of this horrific and avoidable tragedy. Grateful for all I learned with and from him, and also grateful to still be alive. So,
Wow. Wow.
guys, that was Sharon's ex's comment on this video.
Yeah.
And of course, I immediately was wondering what he might say. And I read it in context of what we had just published last year, which I'm pretty sure he doesn't listen to.
Probably not.
Um, and then I was kind of impressed and surprised that I read it as he corroborates pretty much the take that we've taken in our episode 14. Of course, I love that he called out that he was the VP of Last Days Ministries instead of I was the elder of Last Days
Mhm.
Ministries, because this is a secular video. And I think that just sounds a little cultish.
Yeah, definitely. That is a culty sounding term. Well, especially now that we're outside of all that mind fuckery. I mean,
Correct.
before
So I thought it was pretty clever of him. Okay. So,
Yeah,
he was
yeah.
the vice president. Did you guys have business cards? And I got to give him credit. Was he actually a vice
He
president?
was actually a vice president.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
all right. That makes sense. But I was very taken, or very much took note of his words impulsive and childish.
yeah, yeah. Well, did you catch that at the end, though, of what he wrote? Where he said, what was it? Quote, "Grateful to still be alive," end
Mm.
quote. Now, some people might think that's a pretty odd way to finish out a comment, right?
Yeah, and for me, I did notice that, and I was like, "That is the tell." He
Mm,
just said it in that comment, that was the tell, that he also believes Keith was solely responsible for this plane going down.
yeah, it really does speak to that reality that Keith was a danger to himself and to others. And by the way, Tracy, I tried to add my own comment on that YouTube video, suggesting people might want to hear the less sanitized version of the crash story. Hint, our podcast.
Our podcast.
But yeah, my comments were removed multiple times,
Ooh,
multiple times. So
multiple times.
yeah, people definitely want to protect that whitewashed version.
Well, did you post a link like an actual link? Because there are many accounts that just don't allow links.
Well, I did it both ways. I did post it with a link because, yeah. But then I also just posted it with a comment and said, you might want to search for, and gave our
Oh.
name. But as far as I can see, all those comments, they're just gonzo. And then maybe they blocked me, but I didn't try anymore.
Yeah, maybe they're like, who is this linkster out there that keeps trying to put links on our I just made that word up, by the way. Linkster.
That's great. A linkster. Oh
A
my God, I love
linkster.
that. I love that.
But I think we definitely can be able to comment. I haven't tried, and any listeners out there who want to go on once we post the link to this video, feel free to go on and make
Yes.
some comments, but don't post links.
Yes, please do. Please do, and please don't. So, okay, yeah. So obviously my ex did not produce the video. Its title is the all caps now terrifying last minutes of Christian singer Keith Green. And it's on this YouTube account called Tragic Stories. So they've got this series of, well, tragic stories, right? There's
Wow.
about, I can't believe I'm laughing about this. It's not funny,
I know. It's not,
but it
but
is. But it
yeah.
is. So it's about 50 short videos of, I don't know, various musicians and other famous people who've died, mostly in plane crashes. They've got 65,000 subscribers. I have subscriber envy, Tracy. I'm sorry, I do.
That's a lot of subscribers.
It is. And about 19,000 views on this particular video about Keith. So, like, before this, had you ever heard of that channel?
No, absolutely not. So when I went in, I actually noticed their contact page because I was like, who wrote this? Where did this come from? And immediately I saw a disclaimer, which I found very interesting. And so I'll just read it directly. It's written and edited by Tragic Stories. And it's not funny because there are a lot of these tragic stories, but that just was a weird thing to me that it was written by Tragic Stories. So, and then they added this disclaimer, of course. The clips and pictures used in this video are a mix of paid stock by attribution, royalty-free, public domain, and other copyright-free resources or sources, and are used in accordance with the YouTube Fair Use Copyright Guidelines. And it goes into some legalese, sections 107 of the U.S. copyright, blah, blah, blah.
Blah.
All rights belong to the respective owners. If you represent the copyright owner of any of the materials used in this video and have an issue with the use of said material, please send an email to tragicstories@gmail.com. So that tells us, plus, we can see from the content that there are pictures that were definitely pulled from content that we're already familiar with. And then they, cobbled it together. We could tell from published stories that are already out there, which of course is Melody's book, The Life Story of Keith Green, the NTSB reports, the video by the flight safety detectives, the video by Taking Off with Dan. And Sharon, dare I say, they may have cobbled some of that from our episode number 14.
Yes, absolutely. They pulled, I mean, there's numerous almost direct quotes from that crash episode we did. They've just changed a few words here or there to stay out of infringement trouble. But you can really hear it when they're describing. See, now this part isn't funny to me. They're describing the scorched crash site and the kids' flip-flops and the burned body and the storm that follows. Yeah, stuff like that. And all in all, this was not a high quality production. It was not high quality information.
Not at all.
No, and
which is why it surprised me that someone thought your ex produced it because
right, he would do a better job. He would have done a much better job. But my guess is that Tragic Stories channel exists just to get as many views as possible, right? So it's just trying to generate ad revenue. And It felt like an awkward AI script with these obvious errors and awkward phrasing, and yeah, just very cheesy all in all.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it being an AI script until you said that, but definitely. And of course, the stock photos, they were a particular like irritation to me.
Yeah.
Just because I think we're so close to it and they're trying to reenact kind of what the runway looked like. I'm like, "No, no, no,
That's so
that's not
bad.
it, that's not it." Yeah, and then, he liked the piano and these hands at a piano. It was just, like you said, a bit cheesy.
Yeah.
But, in a kind of weird, funny, and unintentional way, this video and the other video that we're gonna mention in a few minutes, raised some interesting questions. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to get with you and talk through it informally, Sharon.
Informally. All right. So the second video is called "We Can Learn a Lot from Keith Green's Plane Crash." Three
Mm.
exclamation points. So this one was from last year. It was published on March 21st, 2023 by James Caddis.
Cadiz?
Cadiz, I don't know, it's Kaddis. He's a pastor in Northern California. He's got 156 subscribers. Oh, Tracy, that's so many.
No, not 156.
Oh,
He
no,
has
no.
156,000
Yeah,
subscribers.
that's what I meant to say. That's what I meant to say. And this particular video's got about 3,400 views. Now, the idea here is that he was trying to weave this into a spiritual object lesson.
Mm.
This guy loves airplanes and wants to use the crash as an analogy for people to get rid of things in their lives. And he's like comparing it to excess weight in the plane. So we want to jettison and get rid of those things that are keeping us from following God as fully as we should. Now,
Hmm.
I'm going to say he clearly has done a good bit of research into the crash itself. I mean, he was knowledgeable. The video also starts with him talking about loving every aspect of aviation, how he enjoys reading NTSB reports. That's kind of like me, like reading financial statements. I love that kind of shit.
Mhm.
He likes investigations, all of it. And he raises some interesting points about the crash, which we will get into shortly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the great thing, or the worst thing, about the YouTube platform is that you can see audience feedback right there in the comments, right?
Mm.
So a lot of stuff when they're listening to our episodes, they have to leave a review or reach out to us through our website. But you can go right into the episode and look at the comments being left. So that was the other reason I wanted to get together with you and just start to share some of the public comments that we've been able to read and find on these videos and share with the audience some of the comments that were left on our
Mhm.
video, which is not really a video, the podcast through the YouTube platform.
Okay.
So, on the terrifying, all caps, AI clickbait video, that's what we'll call it, which is clearly made for a secular audience, right?
Right.
They go through many, many, many musicians that have also met a terrible end. I found it really interesting to look at those comments, which definitely were in stark contrast to the type of comments we get from Christian sites. And I'll
Mhm.
explain it as we read some here. There were definitely people who watched that video and immediately noticed the negligence that was palpable as you
Mhm.
listen to the story. And, for me, Sharon, as I've thought about, this even recently, right, as we've been thinking about this episode and as this day approached, how much our own ability to process this tragedy at the time was just cut so short by what I call the fillers, what YWAM came in and the surrounding ministries and filled the air with how we should think and how we
Mm.
should feel about this tragedy.
Mhm.
I mean, it was just hours when we were being fed with how it was God's hand in all of this, right?
Oh god, yeah.
Anyway, as we started out, Sharon, I don't think there's been a year that has gone by since this 42 years ago that as this date approaches, that I don't stop and pause.
Mhm.
Some of us, even in the old circles, will even message each other. It's like it is a marked day in our lives. And truly, the trauma that we all experience, but it got so quickly covered over that we never even had a chance to unpack all of this. So all that to say, when I was reading these comments from a secular website, it was relieving for me to see it's taken me 42 years to kind of come to grips with the negligence involved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
And here, these people watch this short video and they're like, they're right there. They're just right there. Like, this is so negligent. And we couldn't even say that for years, Sharon.
We couldn't. Yeah, we couldn't. That is very well said, Tracy. Very well said. Thank you.
So I wanted to read a few of those comments. And everyone can go in. We'll post all of the links. But one, quote, "This is about as reckless and irresponsible as you can get. May those poor children rest in peace." And that one struck me because, like I said, it took us a long time to get there. Another one following behind, "How terribly sad. This is a seemingly preventable accident."
Yes. And then someone else commented on that comment and said, "You think? This was as stupid as much as it was sad and tragic."
Another one, quote, "Singers and planes do not mix. Nobody ever realizes this."
God. Quote, "Let's stuff a bunch of children into a plane piloted by a guy who barely knows what he's doing." Hey, but again, we're going to talk about this at the end because, yeah, that's
there's more to that than that.
There's more to that for sure.
The next one, quote, "Did anyone involved in this situation think for more than 5 seconds about what they were doing?"
Yeah. I mean, it's so obvious.
So obvious, but I have to reiterate, we couldn't say that for like 40 years.
We couldn't. All right, on the second video, this is the one by the Christian pastor. There seems to be mostly positive comments, and these are the kind of comments that we are most familiar with when people are talking about Keith Green, because they're mentioning their love for him and for his music and blah-de-blah-de-blah. But there were still also a few comments pointing the problem. Quote, and folks, Tracy and I have wondered if this particular comment is from one of our listeners referencing us, our podcast. So, quote, "They also say that it was probably Keith who pressured this pilot to fly this plane. Last Days had another pilot who was qualified who apparently wasn't available for this flight." And we've said it before, that's because this wasn't a planned flight. This was just a last minute, hey, why not? Why the fuck not thing? Anyway,
right.
Okay.
And another one, quote, "Yeah, we can't push against God's hand when he is trying to say no. Things can go very wrong. However, God could have intervened and kept Keith there." Got a lot of theology in there, Sharon.
Don't even want to go there now.
And finally, our crash episode. It's available as a podcast on YouTube. And yes, that's a thing.
That is so weird to me.
It's such a weird thing. But you can comment directly after you listen to it. Here are some comments. And honestly, Sharon, a few of these on this heavy topic made me laugh out loud. The first one, quote, This is great, guys. Get ready for this one. "The pilot was a top-notch Marine and an incredible athlete. High temperatures that day were 98 degrees. Stole," we'll get to what that means a little bit later, "added significant weight-carrying capacity. I'm not buying the whole narrative. I say sabotage. Keith just published the Catholic Chronicles, which signed his death warrant."
God.
End of comment.
All right. Yes, on the top-notch pilot. Yes, on the temperature of the day. Yes, on the STOL, STOL, short takeoff and landing kit. Yes, on not buying into the narrative. But the Catholics signing a death warrant to have the plane sabotaged. I mean, that's just...
We were so important, Sharon. We were so important. So here's another one, which, is right up that alley. Quote, "I always assumed he was murdered for his stand on abortion." So, I had heard, you probably don't even know this because when we first started off with the Instagram and our account, I traded a couple emails or a couple messages with someone who had talked about this conspiracy. And I was like, what?
Really?
What conspiracy? And they hinted around, there being either the Catholics were angry or somebody was angry, and that there was literally sabotage of the plane. So I assume there's a group of people out there that this is a real thing. And it blew my mind then, and it blows my mind now. And I'm like, we're a ragtag commune, everybody, first of all. And then, frankly, as we've uncovered all of the different things that went into this, damn it, the truth is bad enough that we don't
Ugh.
have to come up with these crazy conspiracy theories.
No shit. All right. Another one. Quote, after listening to this, the one lady seems bitter and almost like she was in love with Keith and angry that he left too soon.
Wonder who that lady is.
This was all kind of before me, but I'm into his music and believe it is anointed. It points me to Christ. He is as flawed a human as we all are. The lyrics testify that he was aware of his pride and shortcoming. I hope you can find a way to forgive so that your bitterness subsides. Life is brief. Eternity matters. You are tough and brazen, so I'm sure you won't care what I perceive. The facts are interesting, but certainly not surprising. The Lord was not surprised either, and nothing happens without his permission. It's sad, but his music still blesses me. Yeah. I mean, we've seen this before, right? Anything negative, it must be that fucking root of bitterness. And of course, God's in control.
God is in control. Yeah. It's always the go-to. I mean, it was the go-to when we were there at Last Days. It's the go-to in many spheres. And especially, they do not like it when we say anything that would impugn not just the character of Keith Green, but their perception of the character of Keith Green, right? Because in their world, in their paradigm, you cannot be used by God in this anointed way that everyone says if there are any of these flaws, these human flaws. And so if they have been blessed by his music, then they've got to have the total stamp of approval by God. And so there's no room for this. And it just doesn't fit with their internal narrative.
Right. Another quote, it's dishonest for you to leave out when Keith began to deeply understand God's grace towards him and towards others. Your turning from Jesus is the fruit of your bitter perspective. You are too obvious, end quote.
Yeah, I actually responded to this comment and may have responded on a message that I got from this same person. They were referencing one of the teaching tapes that went on before Keith died, where he talked about learning about grace. And it's true. Keith was softening some of his harder doctrinal edges in those months before the plane went down. I, of course, Sharon, would say that he was just trading one set of toxic beliefs for another.
Right.
As he was, linking up more with Lauren Cunningham from Youth with a Mission that did have kind of this weird grace in there. But the whole YWAM, that's a topic for another
episode.
But so obviously that softening of some doctrinal issues did not change. Let's see, how did your ex put it?
Right.
His impulsiveness and his childishness, or another way to put that, having to have his own way.
Yeah.
That was not changed.
Not at all. Not at all. Yeah. And if you want to believe God's grace was at work, was it God's grace that was leading Keith to bully Don into flying the plane that day? Yeah, I'm sorry. I just get pissed off.
Yeah. And then, of course, the classic quote, which we're all familiar with, so easy to say, quote, God is always in control. His ways are not our ways. And that's a real comment, folks. And yeah, we could have crafted that one ourselves.
Yeah, well, and that is really the only way that some people can manage their cognitive dissonance. I mean, what else are they going to do, right? What else? All right. So Here is part of an email from one of the listeners of the podcast itself on the audio platform. They actually replied and sent us an email. Hi, Sharon and Tracy. Thank you, ladies, for sharing your stories. I just found your podcast and just finished the crash episode. I made it through with only a couple of sniffly moments, but that fucking grain of wheat verse triggered me back to July of 82, and I began weeping uncontrollably. I was 21 and a huge follower of Keith Green and second chapter of Acts. His death did confuse me, but I kept drinking the Kool-Aid for decades. I finally deconstructed last year, but I'm only out as an atheist / secular humanist / skeptic to close friends and some family. I live in Texas, and when I drive east, I pass the exit to Lindale, and my mind wanders to blurry images of that time. Not anymore. Now I'll have the crazy, funny voices of Sharon and Tracy in my head, and I will smile and be grateful for you and hope that we meet someday.
Oh, I know. That message made our day. It
I
made our
know. I know.
so you can see, Sharon, those comments from all those episodes or all those videos run the gamut.
They do. They do. And I just want to circle back and say, we would absolutely love to meet you and any and all of our listeners. And here's a quick plug, shameless plug, to come join us October 31st for the free Flamey Grant concert party at my Florida farm. Just join our Facebook community group, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes, and you'll get all the deets on that.
Woohoo! Good commercial. Good commercial. All right. So we did now want to talk about a few of the notable points in that first video. Remember, that's the all caps, the terrifying last minutes of Christian music singer Keith Green.
Mhm.
And as we said, there are some things that are absolutely inaccurate and skewed, and some others that are oddly on point.
Dare I say, prophetically on
Ooh.
point?
One thing is this video makes it sound as if Don was the only pilot. But there were two others more experienced with these particular plane. And most people are still amazed when they hear that we had two other pilots, not just one.
Right, right. And Don and one of the other pilots, they were on staff, and they and their families actually lived in our commune. And the third guy, he was local, and he would come in to fly as needed.
Mm-hmm. So let's share some direct quotes from this video. Quote, "At one point, Keith wanted to fly the planes himself, but couldn't yet."
Yep, 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 yep. Keith definitely wanted to fly those planes.
Quote, and again, we're quoting directly from the video itself, not the comments. "On the evening of July 28th, 1982, Keith was waiting for Don as he returned in the ministry's Cessna 182. That was the smaller single-engine plane.
Right.
Which he had flown to Dallas after waking up super early that morning. Keith waited until Don got out of the smaller airplane and with his persuasive personality convinced him to make another flight with the Smalley family. And even though he was tired and hungry, Don agreed."
So it says, quote, "With his persuasive personality, Keith convinced Don." Yes. And I can think of a lot of stronger words that would be way fucking more accurate than just
Yes,
persuasive.
I'm actually interested in the process of how AI compiled all this and spit that out, because yes, we would choose different words. And the fatigue and hunger. And of course, if you listened, to all of these episodes, you'll know that was from the ministry imposed mandatory fasting that we did once a week. And this, of course, was done the night before of this flight.
Yeah. Quote, "Don had never flown the 414 alone before, since his previous 3 hours in the left seat were always with another pilot in command."
And this is another confirmation that there were two sets of controls in the front of the plane.
Right, right. Quote, As it turned out, this wasn't the best time for Don to take his first solo flight in this plane, but Keith wanted to show the Smalley family the ranch from the air, and Don didn't want to disappoint them.
Such It's like a children's book, right? And it's
Stupid.
so ridiculous. Don didn't even know the Smalley families, and it wasn't about not wanting to disappoint them. It was about not disappointing, or more relevant to Don, not disobeying Keith.
Right.
Quote, "You can imagine how cramped it must have been in a plane with only 7 seats."
No shit, Sherlock. And I'm glad that this video does point that out. So we've got 4 adults and 8 children and only 7 seats. And Tracy, you know what? I only recently, I mean, literally today, I remembered something. That 7th seat in that
Mhm.
plane, it's actually the onboard toilet. So it's like this flat, like seating area. It's not like a standard airline seat, with the
Right.
back and everything.
Yep.
So yeah, yeah. All right, next one. Quote, Dawn lifted off about 2,000 feet down the runway and climbed at a steep angle. But soon Dawn noticed that something was wrong. The plane struggled to gain altitude, and it is believed that he underestimated the weight of the 3 small children on board, mistakenly thinking they equaled the weight of one adult.
Wow. Another weird and awkward and odd statement.
Yeah, that damned AI, huh?
It's so AI.
Quote, unbeknownst to him, the plane was overloaded by 450 pounds with full fuel tanks, and the center of gravity was nearly 5 inches off. This imbalance caused the plane to pitch violently up and down. Don fought to control the aircraft, which was dangerously nose high and difficult to manage. As the plane rotated and struggled to climb for another 4,000 feet, which that just doesn't even make sense,
Does it make sense?
the situation grew dire. Just seconds after taking off, the plane hit the tops of the 30-foot trees just 150 feet beyond the end of the airstrip.
Yeah, that script is so confusing and has made so much more sense thinking about it as an AI script,
Right.
because it's contradicting itself. Obviously, the editors didn't catch that.
Yeah.
We know that the airstrip was 3,500 feet long, and the trees were actually almost another 2,000 feet past the end of the runway.
Right. Right. So, I mean, it was airborne for a little bit there. Yeah. Not at all accurate. And yet, Tracy, the
Mm.
parts about the plane pitching violently up and down and Don fighting to control that dangerous nose high situation, those parts are, I'm thinking, accidentally more on point than that AI program could possibly have imagined. And more on that later.
Mhm.
Quote, inside the cabin, the kids were likely still buzzing with excitement, unaware of the approaching disaster.
And I hate when stories like this try to reenact the last minute emotions based on a total fabrication. And I
Yeah.
get it. That's why they're the terrifying, right? It's the whole thing to their tragic stories. But in this case, it's, I think, extraordinarily insensitive. These are kids. And I guess
Mhm.
for us, it hits closer to home because we knew those kids.
Mhm.
And the NTSB report said the plane was airborne for about 20 to 30 seconds.
Mhm.
And we know, Sharon, that it was porpoising violently up and down, up and down. And so I am not going to put thoughts and feelings into what those precious children were feeling, but we can imagine that a
Mhm.
porpoising plane not getting airborne was a cause for great alarm, especially among the adults. So there was no unawareness in that plane.
Yeah.
The struggle was actually visible to any onlookers, which we'll get into.
Yeah. You know, gosh, Tracy, I really respect your sensitivity to this. When I heard that part of the video, it was actually the first time that I stopped to really ponder the question. So, what exactly was it like for the people in that plane for those 20 to 30 seconds? And, we can only imagine, and it's impossible to imagine.
Yes, and I will just say, as a mother, and you and I weren't mothers at the time that this happened, to me, that's the most terrifying part of the story,
Oh
to
my God.
wonder, right? And so that's why it's extraordinarily important for me to not want to add to that pain because that's
Yeah.
really the worst.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been on planes where there's, a slight drop in altitude and people literally scream. And
Mhm.
we will never know. We will never know what they experienced. And it breaks my heart to think of those kids. The oldest boy, he was 12 years old.
Right, I think we all talk about them as kids, like, it's a young
Yeah.
teen
It's an
coming into
yeah.
his teens.
Yeah, there was definitely no unawareness for him. Like this is just
Mm.
all good and yeah. Anyway, ugh. Okay. Quote, the high air temperature of 90 degrees Fahrenheit created a high density altitude, causing a lower climb rate and increasing the risk of stalling, making the plane nearly uncontrollable.
Mhm.
Now, this was both an interesting thing to emphasize about the weather, but also some confusing terminology. And Tracy, you took some time and looked into this much more deeply. So go, woman.
Yeah, so I reached out to my own pilot son for context because I remember specifically when he and I, several years ago, were going over the NTSB report, that weather was not a factor.
Mhm.
So, Sharon, if you remember, there was a rumor for a hot minute that there was a storm that actually took the plane out.
Mhm.
Well, you don't need to remember, Sharon, because actually I have a newspaper clip right here.
Isn't that handy of you?
Handy. So this is the day after 7/29/82, and the headline reads, "Storm blamed in 15 deaths." And then the article goes on to say, high winds and a rash of lightning killed 3 people and injured 2 others during thunderstorms and tornadoes that wrecked homes, flooded buildings, and left thousands in the dark in the Northeast.
Of Texas,
Of
northeast of
Texas,
Texas, yeah.
yes. A religious singer and 11 other people died in a plane crash in a Texas storm.
Oh, there it is.
Yes, authorities said the Dallas-bound plane crashed through a lightning storm in a ball of fire about 500 yards beyond a runway owned by the Last Days Ministry in Van, Texas. The director of the non-denominational ministry, Keith Green, his son and daughter were killed, along with the pilot, another couple, and their 6 children. Green was considered the nation's top contemporary Christian songwriter and singer.
Yeah.
So back before the days of the kind of communication that we have stories like this that get printed in newspapers and gain legs, right? That
Mhm.
people think are true and it's hard to change. So there was a rumor going around that a storm had taken this plane out. And that was ruled not to be true in the
Mhm.
NTSB report. And we talk about the storm, Sharon, and we know that that storm rolled in after the plane
Right.
crash. So it was absolutely not responsible, no lightning responsible. So that's why, as I was reading in these cases and people kept commenting on the heat, to me, that's weather. And it was like, okay, so what is it about the heat and its, impact in this? And it was definitely a factor. So I asked a pilot close to me, was heat really a factor? And, quote, he answered, it was a factor. Density altitude is basically what altitude the plane thinks it's at, right? Where you're really at on the earth. And this is where performance calculations need to happen, including takeoff roll. Will it be long? Climb rate? Will it be slower? So hot, humid, and heavy are definite headache factors. And then it gets into some techno stuff. There's a standard datum plane, which is just a benchmark of what a typical day in Earth would be like. And then you have to make calculations based on the deviation from those standards. So hot and humid has to be calculated for. And if those who have read the NTSB report will notice there's a point number 4 where it says performance data not understood, and the fault goes to pilot in command. So
Okay,
that's a
okay.
lot.
Okay, wait. All right. So, let's take a moment because I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure some listeners are going, "What the fuck did she just say?" So, just to make sure we can break this down and understand it because you're saying stuff, yeah. First, when air is hotter and more humid, that makes it more dense.
Yes.
Okay. And if the air is more dense, Does that mean that the plane needs a longer takeoff and a higher speed at takeoff?
Yes.
Okay. And the aviation industry has picked an arbitrary, quote, standard air density benchmark. So then pilots need to calculate any differential if the air is thicker than whatever that standard is. And then they would need to potentially increase their takeoff distance and speed.
Well, correct. That's how I understand it. And I can't comment on arbitrary, right? But it's definitely an adopted standard.
Okay, an international standard, I think I
Yes.
remember you saying. Okay, all right. And then that term, quote, performance data, that is referring to this particular calculation about air density. And the NTSB report states that Don did not understand performance data.
That is how this pilot said that performance data could get rolled into that failure, right? And that's clear on the NTSB report. There was a failure on understanding performance data.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I'm obviously not a pilot, so we might hear from all the pilots out there that you guys totally screwed that up. But for my simple brain, this is how I interpret it, right? Hot, heavy air, it gives it additional weight. It's harder to climb, right? So you already have this hot, heavy air, and then you have extra weight. You're going to have a harder time climbing out. Sounds simple to me. And obviously, the STOL kit that was on there could have helped this. But it's hard for me, Sharon, right, when we read this in the NTSB report, because as I've been around, a few pilots that I've gotten close to, this is some basic stuff to flying. And so it's very hard for me to think that a military pilot had no understanding of such performance data.
Right.
I mean, remember, he just took off and landed a little bit before he did this flight.
Right.
Like, he's been flying airplanes out of Texas and out of this portion of Texas successfully. So all which lead me to believe that maybe something else was going on inside the plane, which is what I think you're going to get to.
Right. That's great stuff, Tracy. Not sure I totally understand it, but thank you. And it's getting a little clearer. So thank you. Thank you for all that digging. Okay, let's go on to the second video, which was, again, quote, we can learn a lot from Keith Green's plane crash. So at the beginning, the pastor says, quote, the weather conditions may have contributed to it a little bit because of how hot it was. The evening had not cooled off, and the air density takes on a massive effect on things like angle of attack and how an airplane goes in the air.
Exactly what I just explained.
Exactly.
And that's what made me ask, because I hadn't really heard that before.
Okay. Yeah.
Now you have it here, folks.
Now we have it. Okay. Next, he says, quote, did you know that the single greatest contributing factor to the death of Keith Green was pilot error and bad pilot judgment?
Yeah, and pilot error and bad judgment were absolutely a huge factor in this. And Sharon, I still maintain, I think that it's not necessarily the greatest factor in this.
Right. All right, let's continue.
So, quote, the pilot should have discerned the fact that the plane was loaded too heavy. The center of gravity on the plane was also wrong. And there are many pilots today that would still fly that model, as heavy as it was, as long as the weight distribution was set correctly.
So remember what he said there, folks, that there are many pilots who could still fly the plane as heavy as it was. And also remember that comment about the weight distribution.
Mm-hmm. Another quote, the way he chose to pull the plane up, which is referring to Don the pilot, he started picking up speed on the runway and made a very common error that lots of rookie pilots will make. When he feels like he needs to lift off pretty quickly instead of increasing his airspeed, what he actually did was, while trying to increase his airspeed, he pulled back his elevator, which caused the airplane to nose up, which actually caused it to stall.
So let's be very, very clear. Don Burmeister was not a rookie pilot, not by a long shot. Years and years as an elite military aviator. He was an engineer. He understood these principles beyond a doubt, and his years of experience would make it second nature to him. But do you know who would have been a rookie pilot sitting there in the cockpit of that plane? Keith Green.
Whew. Yeah, I was thinking about this. And Sharon, there's a comparison. I know I'm from Pennsylvania originally, where we had a lot of icy conditions and I had to learn how to drive. And when you have been driving for a while, you know not to slam on the brakes when you hit ice. You know
Mm-hmm.
that if you start to slide, you have to turn your wheel towards the direction of travel. And you can't even think of these things logically. Like, you just learn the feel of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for those who've never driven on snow or ice, when you start to feel the slip, or the most dangerous thing with young drivers is their instinct is to slam on the brakes, right, to stop it. And that only increases the skid and completely sends them out of control. And to me, that's a really good illustration of the difference between a rookie on the ice versus someone who has been driving on the ice with experience.
Mm-hmm. Good analogy.
Good analogy. All right. So I'm going to continue on. Another quote, which was terrible judgment, by the way, because what he should have done is, as he realized he wasn't going to get enough lift, he should have stayed at the same altitude, keeping the angle that the plane was flying in the same direction. Maybe in some cases slightly nose down, which would be the opposite, right, of what you would think, just for a second to pick up enough airspeed and then eventually be able to pull back, which would have given him enough time to get over the trees. No problem.
Yes. When the plane was having trouble gaining lift, an experienced pilot would know to keep the nose level and gain speed, or even temporarily slightly nose down. A rookie, however, would panic and try to pull the nose up away from the ground, which would only increase the stall.
Another quote. The second greatest contributor to that crash was weight. Weight, if he knew that he had that kind of weight on board, which he did, he should have separated the flight. They should have done 2 flights, or he should have dropped the majority of the fuel that was on the plane.
Okay. Well, no, this is logical. I mean, I give this guy credit. This is logical, but it also totally misses the point, the context of what the actual situation was that evening. Don would have had no interest in making that flight, right? It was a stupid joyride. He's tired. He's hungry. He knew he didn't meet the insurance requirements. And he was striving with all his heart, like all of us were, to obey God and obey our leaders. This was not about dividing up the passengers or not dividing them up into 2 flights because it's like so important. We've got to give these people this joyride. No. This was Keith insisting that Don do it.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't know what those conversations looked like. But I guess the reason I laughed is I can't imagine for this little joyride them dropping fuel, right, for it.
Right.
And I just wanted to add, like I said, I've known some young pilots that are starting to get their training, and in their very early days, they seem to gain and understand these principles. So
Mm-hmm.
it really does blow my mind that someone as skilled as Don Burmeister would have violated all of these basic principles. Really
There's a
blows my
reason.
mind.
There's a reason. There's a
Okay.
reason.
Okay. So deep breath. And this is for everybody, not just for us. There is a reason, and I think it's clear that we're pretty convinced of that reason, and we're about to discuss openly exactly what we cut from our episode last year. So we did record some of it and we cut it out. And now we think it's time to say out loud what a number of others, not just us, but including some highly qualified aviation experts and some direct eyewitnesses that we all have been saying behind closed doors for a while. And so here we go.
Here we go. All right. All right. Well, why won't these other people say it out loud? So some have personal loyalty to Keith and or Last Days Ministries. Some people worry what other friends would think or say about them if they came forward. Some of them are Christians still, and they don't want to damage what they perceive to be the work of the kingdom of God. And, in general, I mean, it's just human to want to avoid controversy and emotional drama. That's totally normal. And some have valid concerns for their own professional reputations if they were to speak out publicly. And all right, and the last thing I'm just going to say, oh my God, this is going on and on. I'm sorry. But last year, when we actually recorded an overview of this concept, but then decided to edit it out of the 2023 episode, it was because we were coming from an abundance of caution, not wanting to be accused of sensationalism. And as I mentioned, in the months that followed, I was able to get confirmation from experts and direct witnesses. So I am fully confident to state these things publicly now.
Okay. Okay. And I will just add, I think as more of these stories come out, I mean, there is a maligning of Dawn, and I think that is also hard for us just to sit back quietly while that happens, right?
I fucking hate that. I hate how it's just, pilot error, pilot error, pilot error. I hate that. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So some people are not going to like what you have to say, but go for it, Sharon. I'm with you.
Okay. Let's start with this fact. All three of the pilots, Don Burmeister, and the three of them together had 100% agreed that Keith should never, never, never be allowed to sit in the front of the planes. Why?
It's crazy.
Yeah. Why? This is their agreement. Why? Because they understood the danger of Keith's impulsivity, Keith's pushiness. He's constantly trying to talk them into letting him have a go at the handle controls while they're up in the air.
Yeah, a friend of other pilots personally confirmed to us that Keith was very persistent, which goes along with everything that you especially know about Keith.
Yeah.
Very persistent to let him try to fly the planes.
Yeah.
I mean, even AI picked it up as far as his persuasive personality, which I was like, yeah.
Right. And then there's even just the arrogance for him to think that he could be smart enough to fly a plane with no training whatsoever just by having watched these other guys a little bit here and there. I mean, it's just fucking crazy.
Yeah, but even your ex's comment did say that Keith was a genius. And I can't comment on that, but if that is the constant feedback that he got a lot or people related to him, I think he probably felt he could.
Yeah. Yeah. And that God would keep him safe, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
All right. Here's the next big fact. On this flight, on July 28th, 1982, Keith was sitting up front in the co-pilot seat. And this is our outrageous assertion.
Which, if true, could cause a lot of outrage indeed.
What if Keith was ultimately responsible for the crash in two ways? Keith, not Don. First, as we discussed last year, he's using his cult leader status. He's exerting spiritual manipulation and coercion to get Don to agree to fly a 7-seater plane with 12 people on board.
Yeah, and that's pretty much a slam dunk, especially if Don's already tired and hungry at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. Second, and this is the thus far never publicly talked about way in which Keith would bear ultimate responsibility. What if, in those critical seconds after liftoff, as the plane is straining to gain altitude, Keith Green literally grabbed that second set of controls right in front of him, trying to pull the nose up, which is, as we know, the absolutely wrong thing to do, the total rookie thing to do. He's fighting, in essence, the pilot Don Burmeister's correct attempts to keep the nose down in order to gain airspeed.
And of course, Sharon, there are eyewitness statements that say that Keith was in the co-pilot chair.
Mm-hmm.
They speak of a violent porpoising. Every time this has come up, it's actually used that word, a violent porpoising. Violent. Nose up, then nose down, then nose up, then nose down, then nose up, then nose down. By trying to pull the nose up in his understandable terror, Keith would have put the plane in an unstable gyration so it couldn't get enough speed to gain altitude, ultimately causing it to stall and then, as we know, crash beyond the trees in a big ball of fire.
Yeah. So for those people who want a little bit more, here's what we can share. Now, I want to note that we are honoring the privacy and requests of others to not be named. Okay? I have had direct correspondence with an aviation expert who spoke with both other pilots, including the one who was the eyewitness. This expert totally believes that Keith attempted to wrestle the control of the plane away from Don. But because there's no evidentiary proof, just lots of circumstantial evidence and the one witness, he cannot publish his conclusion. And I totally respect him for that. I don't fault this guy at all for that.
Yeah.
Also, after conversations with both the other pilots, this same expert came to believe that the cause was not the balance and not the weight, because according to the witness, John Smalley, the heaviest passenger, he was not originally seated in the back of the plane after all.
Yes, and reports that John was in the very back, and I don't know how they corroborated that, could be the result of all sorts of displacement during the crash itself.
Right. I mean, the thing fucking exploded. Yeah.
Right.
Also, in reported conversations with a number of other Cessna 414 pilots, all of them said they could have flown that plane despite it being overweight.
Yes. And I mean, that's what's been staggering to hear because, and remember, it was equipped with STOL, which is STOL, and it stands for short takeoff and landing. And we now have a better understanding of that equipment. I think some of us had mistakenly thought that there were these flaps that the pilot needed to remember to deploy to help, and that maybe Don forgot to do that.
Right.
But that's not the case because there are different types. But basically, the STOL kits are pieces of metal put on the leading edge of the wings to create greater lift at slower speeds.
Right. And Tracy, this is something else that I more recently remembered. Pretty early on after the crash, I mean, obviously there's investigation, there's all this shit going on. I remember Wayne telling us, leadership, meaning this was me and Martin and Wayne and Kath. He said that there were interviews with a number of experienced 414 pilots, and I think he even said a flight simulator, although I'm not 100% certain on that. But anyway, this was the thing of the same overweight and the same balance issue possibility. And the experienced pilots were able to fly the plane under those conditions without crashing it.
Yeah.
So, everyone, bottom line, it is our belief that the violent porpoising, nose up, then down, then up, then down, then up, then down, that was the result of Keith, in his panic and his arrogance, grabbing the co-pilot controls and trying to pull the nose up, while at the same time, Don was trying to push it down to gain the necessary airspeed and lift.
Yeah. And I mean, if Don is the only one at the controls, it absolutely doesn't make any sense for there to be violent porpoising, right?
Right.
And of course, Sharon, there's definitely a strong argument against Don. We do not deny his culpability in this at all. He was the pilot in command.
Absolutely.
But I have to say, in talking with pilots who really understood this, no matter how experienced you are and how great you are and all of those performance data calculations that you would have done, they would have mattered not a bit if someone is fighting you for control of the plane.
Right.
um,
And then there's also for those who've never experienced a high control group, I'm sure they have a hard time understanding the coercive power of the leader.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and he was the pilot. And I know that I don't know if there's more awareness now, because if you are a pilot to a high profile, celebrity who tries to put pressure on you to take flights that you do not feel good about, there is more awareness about it is your responsibility to stand up to those strong personalities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we know it happens. It doesn't just happen in these Christian control spaces. It happens in other spaces. And it's absolutely the pilot in control's responsibility to say no,
Mm-hmm.
and to say it's, whatever. It was we needed to divide it into 2 flights, whatever.
But if you think that celebrity is enough of a pressure, a high profile, rich,
Mm-hmm.
sports champion or rock star, whatever,
Right.
yeah, there's that celebrity. But on top of this, you've got the whole God card and this idea of being in submission and obedient to God.
Yeah. And that one, of course, is the most difficult for us, right? Because we knew Don's beautiful spirit is the only way to describe it, right? He sold everything he had to volunteer his time at Last Days. And, I think Keith was he was hard to resist. He preached an unquestioning obedience. I mean, that's why we started the school, to take people through that you have to obey your leader as though they are the voice piece of God.
Mm-hmm.
And in LDM, we did have that culture of deference to leadership. And, some people were strong enough to buck up against it. And like I said,
But we kicked them out. They got kicked out.
we did kick them out. Everyone, who knew Keith corroborates, even his best friends. Like, if you listen to interviews by people who are really trying to be favorable, will always kind of couch that he could be pushy. He could not let things go, right? Also, I mean, and this is super important. Keith knew that the insurance policy prohibited Don from being able to solo pilot until he had more hours in the plane. Keith knew that Don wasn't current. He knew that this flight would be in violation. Keith pressured Don to make a flight, and he pressured Don to let him. This is the one you might know more than me, and this is the one that's really hard for me. If all of the pilots had agreed, Keith pressured Don to let him sit in the co-pilot chair.
Right. Right. Oh, holy shit. Oh my God, Tracy. Something has just occurred to me. And I've got these like little chills. I hope this is not the case, but this question just hit my mind. I wonder if there's any chance at all that Keith was also wanting to do a little bit of showing off for his friends that are just there, right? Look at me. I can sort of fly this plane. See, I'm in the co-pilot seat. I
Oh.
mean, okay, wait, think about this. If he really wanted his friends to see the ranch, right? This is sightseeing, then either Dee Dee or John should have had that front seat. That's the way better view.
Oh, yeah.
Holy shit.
I mean, I had been thinking about clearly there being an element of showing off just in making this flight. And it was so important to take this because, I think we even shared it on Instagram, a picture of John Smalley back in the early Jesus People days out in California. And Keith is there. And so they come up from this kind of ragtag beginning. And here he's visiting now Keith's compound. And he has
Right.
2 airplanes and all of this, infrastructure, and wanting to show off and why it was important to, even take this flight. And not even in an evil show off way. I think it's very human, right? Like, look at what I've
Yeah.
built. Look at what I have. But I didn't think of the element of also wanting to be the pilot at the
Yeah.
front of the plane and how
Fuck.
important that would be. And maybe
Fuck.
Don's sweetheart was like, okay, yeah, ugh.
Oh, fuck.
Mm.
Oh,
But you're right. I mean, all of that. And again, we understand the humanness of all of these things.
right.
This had a tragic, tragic end.
It did. Because if Keith did grab the controls, as we and others believe he did, it is understandable. He was in terror,
Mhm.
at the point where he's pulling up when he shouldn't be. Yeah. But the reason he even had access to those controls was because he pushed his way into sitting into that co-pilot seat. And that is absolutely inexcusable arrogance.
Hmm. Yeah, and I do wanna emphasize that we had said that many of us in the Circle of Last Days have talked about this behind closed doors. This is not just Sharon and Tracy's crazy idea or Sharon's crazy idea. This is believed by many people who are
Yeah.
close to the situation.
Yeah. Well, and more to the point, Tracy, not just us who were there at Last Days and knew Keith, but aviation experts
Mm.
and the other pilots. They believe it too.
Yeah, and it makes it all the more, tragic and sad, but it also does help with that whole, where was God in all of this?
You think it helps? I think it makes it more
Ah,
complicated for people.
I don't know. I think even when I go back to when I was just a young girl, did I turn 19? I may have turned 19 by the time this had happened. And it never occurred to me that God wasn't in control. It just never occurred to me that it wasn't just a really genuine accident, right? Accidents happen and no one is culpable.
Well, wait a second. Jesus sure as hell didn't take the wheel here, but
Oh,
Keith Green did.
Jesus did not take the wheel.
Mm.
Okay, well, I think this is going to be another difficult thing for people to process. Maybe, maybe not. What do you think? What do you think some of the responses will be?
To our outlandish assertion.
Well, I don't find it so outlandish anymore, so
No, me either. Actually, the more we talk about it, the more it's like, duh, duh.
yeah, yeah, it is more like that.
I think people's responses are gonna vary wildly. I think that the LDM and Keith Green groupies, they're they're almost certainly gonna wanna come at us with their pitchforks, Tracy.
Yeah, because I think in general, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid or poking at a scab. I would say that they would say that. "Why? Why? Why do you have to do
Mm,
this?" And it's like, I think, this is super important
yeah,
to get to the truth. I mean, lots of time is spent in studying these aircraft crashes to get to truth, and I think this is a very viable factor.
yeah. And I think other people listening are hopefully gonna weigh the evidence. Yeah, it's circumstantial for sure, but there's definitely very significant data points and expert opinions. And perhaps people will conclude, like we have, that the ugliest truth of this plane crash has been suppressed for decades until now.
Hmm. Yep, it'll be interesting to read the comments on this episode for sure.
For sure. Okay, Tracy,
Yes.
can we get back to our break now?
Back to our break.
All right, people, thank you for listening. Rate us, review us.
Leave a comment.
Yeah, we want to see those comments. All right, everybody. We'll catch you on the other side of our break, which we don't know when the hell that will be, but we'll let you know.
We'll let you know, so make sure to follow us on Instagram, feetofclay.cultsisters for all the latest, which feeds into the Facebook story page. So we'll be letting you know there so that you don't miss an episode.
Bye, bye, bye.